Hey, welcome to BJJ Mental Models, episode 43. I'm Steve Kwan.
I'm Matt Kwan.
BJJ Mental Models is your guide to a conceptual and intelligent BJJ approach. I'm back at training. I took some time off because of the holidays. It's Canadian Thanksgiving up here, so I went and I got tuned up. That was fun.
Yeah. Got beat up by some blue belts.
You know it. In my defense, they are very, very good MMA blue belts.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's totally okay.
Lay and pray for
It's totally
5
okay
minutes.
for me to get squashed by blue belts.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really a rite of passage, right? You know, a part of becoming a good blue belt is finding the lazy old casual black belt and just like riding their face. I mean, that's such an important part of your jiu-jitsu journey.
Did you get your guard pass?
I don't really get my guard passed anymore because I just go to turtle, and so
God.
like is that even really? I mean, I don't know. Do you? I guess you can pass turtle, kind of.
Turtle is not a guard. I don't care what Talus says.
I believe turtle is actually classified
Or
as a guard
Eduardo.
now.
Yeah, Thanksgiving was fun. I feel nice and fat now, but that's good because I do middleweight now.
Now, on the topic of techniques that are questionable, today we're going to be talking about sport versus self-defense. This is a topic that we actually have been asked about a few times, and I'm happy to talk about it. And of course, you couldn't really find anyone better to talk about this topic than us because, you know, as everyone knows,
I've gotten into many street fights.
Yeah, Matt and I are Canadian street fighters from the mean streets of Port Coquitlam, British Columbia, Canada. So, you know, very often when we're, you know, walking from the middle school to the convenience store, you get jumped by a bunch of Hell's Angels and you got to learn to defend yourself. So we are very well equipped to tell you about how to defend yourself in a real life confrontation.
Yeah. Have you ever gotten in a street fight, Steve?
No. The closest thing to me getting into a street fight would be when my daughter was exceptionally difficult at getting her teeth brushed, and I had to kind of find a way to pin both of her arms and brush her teeth. It was pretty like intense. That's the closest thing that I've ever had to a street fight.
I once saw Dad get into a little hissy fit fist fight with a Chinese man at the mall for a parking spot. And it was funny because...
Okay, I got to hear this story. This is news to me.
It was like watching two cats flailing at each other. Oh yeah, I was like 5 when it happened, and yeah, we went to the mall, went in, came out, and on the way in, this Chinese dude was yelling at Dad like, "Oh, you stole my parking spot!" All this stuff. My dad's like, "Whatever." Get bent, and then we go in, then we come out. He's waiting there for us in his minivan. Obviously, it was like teal or some color or gold, and his family's in the car. And then they just started having this like fist fight, and no real punches were thrown. Like the fight metrics would have been hilarious. Nothing landed, and then they broke up and were clearly too terrified to fight each other. And there I was, traumatized, just wondering what the hell just happened.
How did I just hear about this now?
I don't know. I don't even know if he sworn me to secrecy or whatever, but
I hope not.
For some reason, I just never talked about it. And yeah, but that's when I realized my dad has no idea how to throw a punch.
And that's why Matt started jiu-jitsu. Well, on the topic of self-defense, if you ever actually need to defend yourself, the sad truth is it's probably not going to be some big heroic thing. It's going to look exactly like that looked. The reality is that most street fights are just absolutely pathetic to watch.
And shit shows.
Yeah, it's just a total disaster on all fronts. The only real benefit you're going to get out of it is you might get marginally famous if someone records it and puts it on World Star. That's
World Star! It will happen too because everyone has a phone, and people's reaction when seeing conflict is not to jump in and de-escalate. It's to pull out a camera phone so they can get it on tape.
Yeah, I can't miss this.
And put it on Instagram. I know because I've done it.
Well, if you're like me, then a lot of the stuff you wind up watching on social media is just these street fight videos that are absolutely ridiculous and embarrassing. So the moral of the story, I suppose, is that when it comes to self-defense, prevention is the best strategy.
Yeah. And obviously get the lapel out, which we're going to talk about.
Absolutely. Worm guard is a devastating self-defense technique. But in all seriousness, it's probably pretty obvious at this point that neither Matt nor I should be your first source of information when it comes to how to defend yourself in a self-defense scenario. But what we can talk about are the different philosophies and the pros and cons to training one versus the other, because that is something that we do get asked about. How relevant is modern sport jiu-jitsu to self-defense? This tired old debate that has been going on forever, but now we're going to weigh in on it. So hooray.
I think what we should do is try and piss off the Gracies, and let's talk about Gracie tacticals.
I thought this whole episode was to piss off the Gracies.
Let's talk about how effective the Gracie self-defense system is. The cringy takedowns that you see them demonstrate.
It's funny you mention that, because I originally when I started jiu-jitsu, I trained under a Gracie school, and so I saw those techniques, and I mean, they look good in theory. A lot of them technically aren't bad, but the main problem is if you're not training with realistic resistance, you're not going to be able to apply it, right? It's not a matter of actually knowing how to do a certain technique. It's a matter of being comfortable under pressure.
Yeah.
So a lot of these techniques they show where it's like you put your hands up and then you go in for a single or a double or whatever.
Or a goshi.
Yeah, that is not going to work if the other guy clocks you first and you have no experience with that and you don't know how to respond. Yeah. So I worry that a lot of those self-defense techniques have kind of the same risks that, self-defense seminars do as well, where people go and they learn how to eye gouge, and after a 1-hour seminar with no resistance, they think they would be capable of defending themselves in the street. Now, the Gracie self-defense stuff is obviously a lot better than that, but the same fallacy applies, where if you're training something and you're never really training that against real resistance, you're just deluding yourself, right? It would be like if you only train jiu-jitsu against like a grappling dummy. Even if you technically know every move, none of it is going to come together in reality. So it's really the same thing in self-defense.
Yeah, I went and bought a grappling dummy for the gym, and I was wondering, like, should I get a grappling dummy that has arms and legs that you can submit, or should I get a throwing dummy that's heavy and, has arms sticking out, but you can't really do like omoplatas and stuff? And in the end, I went with a throwing dummy because I know I can get a way better workout lifting that thing, and also it's way more practical than just a dummy that has limbs that bend, because I've used those before, and then I came to realize, like, this isn't going to do shit for me. Just a stationary dummy. If you're thinking about buying one, you're going to get way better training if you find a training partner, and you might be like, oh, well, I'm going to be at home and I want to drill at home on this dummy. You're better off honestly watching tape, I think, and just practicing on someone in the gym. And that's my opinion.
Let's be real too. You're not going to drill on that dummy. You might say you're going to drill on that dummy, but you're not going to sit there and bang out 100 reps every night while your wife is looking at you like a total idiot. Like, that's not going to happen. That thing is just going to wind up taking a ton of space in your house, and eventually you're going to get pressured into throwing this thing out, and you're going to feel real stupid. Yeah. I think all white belts and even blue belts go through that phase where they ask themselves, should I buy a grappling dummy? I know I have.
Oh, yeah.
And
me too.
I decided not to. Yeah. But you have a gym. I decided not to just because of the sheer cost of those things. Yeah. They are ridiculously expensive. And I'm glad I didn't buy one, because it's not about how many reps you bang out. It's about being able to practice with realistic resistance, and doing hundreds of armbar reps against a grappling dummy is not going to equip you to do an armbar against even the whitest of white belts. It's just not going to happen. And incidentally, one of the main grappling dummies you can buy is from Gracie Academy.
Yeah.
Yep. They'll teach you everything.
Yeah. But I do think that throwing dummies are good, because
there's real resistance.
There's real resistance. Yeah. There's weight. There's, you can practice your takedowns. You can get a workout on it. And, throwing a partner, it's hard to do that without putting a wear and tear on someone's body. So you can just get as many reps as you want. So I think throwing dummies are good. I also have the CXT, which is like
it's Kirby.
It's basically Kirby, and you can practice your balance and stuff on it. It's okay. I mean, it's not exceptional. I don't use it very often, but the kids like it.
It is fun. It's like a giant beach ball with little stubby arms and legs.
Yeah. While we're on the topic of interesting jiu-jitsu accessories to purchase, did you get those Kurt Angle grips?
I did. You know what? I actually want to at some point do an episode on like game-changing products that you can buy.
Is it good?
The Kurt Angle
Are you saying they're game changing?
No, they're not.
Okay.
The main reason I haven't proposed that episode is because everyone knows that all of the stuff I recommend is going to be ridiculous, like grappling socks and grappling gloves. Yeah, so for those who don't know, I train with someone who recently had a hand injury, and they found these like weird compression gloves that are supposed to replace, having to tape your fingers together. Yeah. And they look kind of like penguin flippers. Like basically they're like gloves, but they only have 2 holes for your fingers instead of 4.
You look like Gambit.
Actually, everyone at the gym has been calling me Zoidberg, which I think is a way better name.
That's so awesome.
They work okay.
That's so awesome and anti-Semitic.
I know. Is it really? He's a crab. I don't know. Is it really?
Zoidberg.
There's no way Zoidberg is actually a Jewish name.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to Google this. I can't believe that's
in the year 3015 or whatever Futurama takes place, it's a Jewish name.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're for me, the real thing that convinced me to buy these gloves was that they are officially sponsored by Kurt Angle. And I thought I'd seen these gloves somewhere before because Kurt Angle was wearing these weird flipper things on his hands on one of the pay-per-views. And I thought, what the hell?
Oh, so he actually wrestles in those?
It's part of his gear. Well, he's retired now, but as of a few months ago, before he retired, he was wrestling with these flipper things on his hand. And I thought, what on earth has he done to his hands? And you can actually get, and I did get, the Kurt Angle version of the flippers, which have little stars and stripes on them.
You have them now?
Not on me.
No, but, well, I fucking hope not. We're recording.
I'm wearing them right now,
We're recording a podcast currently. But no, in training, you've worn them and stuff?
I've worn them. They're okay.
And they protect your fingers?
They do.
Because I have fingers that are totally ligaments are gone and the fingers bend off to the side, so I have to tape them, otherwise they'll just bend off to the side. But
they definitely seem to work. I like them so far. I've only used them twice. I'm not sure how well they're going to hold up because they're really, really thin. But that said, if you're going through a lot of tape, it's a lot easier to get on and off, and then you don't have like weird gummy residue on your fingers for the rest of the day when you take the things off.
The only problem is
Yeah, the only problem
wear fucking stupid gloves.
This is a reference that only old people are going to get, but I walked into the gym wearing those, and one guy just looked at me up and down, and he said, "You look like a thalidomide baby." A lot of young people aren't going to get that reference, but yeah, they're very goofy looking. Like, taping up your fingers, no one looks at that and thinks, "Man, what a weirdo." But when you come in
that's
with
cool. That's what jiu-jitsu guys do.
Yeah, but the fundamental problem is when you come in and you look like a seal or a penguin, it's just not a great look. Now, that said, everyone who knows me knows that I am not particularly concerned with looking like an idiot when I train. That's kind of my whole thing. Yeah. So
you do the full meal deal in terms of accessories.
Well, that's the thing. Like, the flippers aren't nearly as ridiculous as my pink gi or my headgear or my little foot protectors.
Or your grappling socks and your...
Well, yeah, my foot protector. I wear little grappling
ninja
socks.
Slippers, and also your never tie black belt.
I do have
no offense, Kathy. It's a great product. Please don't get mad.
It is for kids.
For kids, it's a wonderful product. I have to bust Steve's balls because he's a black belt.
It's awesome. I have a black belt and it's Velcro and I don't actually have to tie it. And then people always laugh at me because I wear this thing and then I kick their asses. And then it's twice as embarrassing for them because they got beat up by a guy who's wearing a Velcro belt. So it's win-win.
But seriously, if you are a gym owner, check out the Never Tie belt. If your kids are having issues keeping their belts tied, it is a good product.
Weren't we talking about self-defense?
And then we talked about grappling dummies, and now we're talking about the stupid shit you wear when we train.
So we've plugged about 100 products here that we will never see any income from.
Maybe we should just start again.
Yeah, okay. So we're not going to be too... Okay, so on the topic of sport versus self-defense, this is a question that I think everyone always has at back of mind at some point, until eventually they train long enough to realize it really doesn't matter. But a lot of people always ask, this particular style of jiu-jitsu, is this relevant in a self-defense situation? For me, first and foremost, when I started training, I got into jiu-jitsu because I was interested in the self-defense aspect. And I think that's why a lot of people start jiu-jitsu is they saw how it performed in UFC 1 and it's kind of like proven to be an effective martial art. So people got into it. But then after a while, people kind of start going towards other goals in jiu-jitsu that are not really related to preventing yourself from getting attacked on the street. Now, in my case, I am interested in jiu-jitsu as a self-defense art, but I don't necessarily train that a lot because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the best way to defend yourself is just to not get into the kind of situation where you need to. It's the same principle as when someone says, "Oh, how do you defend a triangle?" Well, don't get caught in the triangle is the best answer. And I know how unsatisfying an answer that is, but it's the best answer, right? Yeah. It's
against someone who knows what they're doing, you pretty much already lost.
Yeah. Your best answer is to avoid the problem in the first place. And that is a really just good advice in almost all walks of life. I mean, Matt, I don't know about you, but have you ever noticed that trouble seems to gravitate towards certain people? Like
me?
Like most people go through
I don't know why. It's always following me.
But no, seriously, like most people go through their entire lives without ever having a police confrontation or getting into a bar fight or, but then there are these people where it seems to be an almost monthly occurrence for them that something terrible happens. And at some point, you realize that it's just these people are doing things that are unwise. They're putting themselves in no-win situations where they're going to wind up having to defend themselves somehow, right? So there are going to be people out there who they live in a dangerous area and they're more exposed to these kinds of risks. But I think a lot of the time, the people who really, need this kind of stuff, they're really concerned about it from a self-defense standpoint, and they actually wind up in a scenario where they need it. A lot of the time, I think those are self-inflicted wounds, and they're probably living a lifestyle where they're getting themselves into these scenarios. So my advice is, if you're really concerned about self-defense, don't get into situations where you need self-defense. That is your first and foremost best piece of advice.
Yeah, and then there's always the people that are like, oh, you pull guard in the street, you're going to be in trouble and all this stuff. It's like, truthfully, I think pulling guard actually could be an effective way to defend yourself in the street if needed. I'm not saying jump guard.
You might blow the guy's knees. That could end the fight right there.
It is the most dangerous technique in jiu-jitsu after all. But no, like, you can never account for unpredictable variables like having multiple attackers. That's a situation where jiu-jitsu really doesn't work, or even certain weapons, that's when things can get really dicey. Like if someone has a knife, you don't want to be grappling with them. You want to create space generally, right? But yeah, everyone already knows that. Everyone already knows that jiu-jitsu only works one-on-one, and you don't want to
because every time I look on a message board, that seems to be the knock against jiu-jitsu is, that's only going to work in a one-on-one scenario, but my kung fu is going to work against a 3-on-1. That kind of fantasy is something that I think people have, from our generation, we grew up with Hollywood movies where some big jack dude on roids would beat up like 10 guys at once like it was nothing. But we know that in reality, any martial art that claims that it's going to help you in a multiple attacker scenario is BS. It just doesn't work.
Well, nowadays in Hollywood movies, it's like a 110-pound woman beating up like 10 Russian SWAT members.
Incidentally,
Spetsnaz members.
Usually using jiu-jitsu, and then you watch that and you go, they're using real martial arts that work.
Yeah. I think the most effective self-defense tool, honestly, is MMA. I think if you're going to practice a martial art, and to your point when you're saying about how live resistance is more important than repetitions or whatever, it's really hard to find more realistic resistance than in an MMA situation where it goes from standing to ground to striking to, back to wrestling and all these different martial arts. I think that's going to be your best, and just the mental toughness that you acquire through the adversity of training MMA. I think that's probably going to be your best bet for survival. But in a street situation where you can't tell how many people there are and you can't tell what kind of weapons are being used, I think the best answer is always going to be to create space and get the hell out of there.
Yeah, I think that anyone who really tells you that they have a perfect solution for self-defense, or they're trying to convince you to train something else because jiu-jitsu doesn't work for self-defense, there's really nothing that is going to work well in a self-defense scenario. We've talked in the past about how jiu-jitsu is a game of probabilities. Even at a black belt level, you never have a 100% chance that you can beat someone, even if the other person is a white belt. It's a game of probabilities. Anything can happen. And when you're in a self-defense situation, there are a lot more variables than you can process. And those can really, really impact your likelihood of coming away unharmed. So it doesn't matter if you've been training Krav Maga for years and years and years. What if there's two people? What if there's a knife or a gun? What if there's someone that you didn't see? be, there's all sorts of variables. And really the only good answer is avoid the situation in the first place. And failing that, I think to Matt's point, get out of there. That's almost always the other. If you do get pulled into the fight, that's the best way to get out of it.
Yeah, like I have some friends that I train and they're like high level SWAT guys. And they say, when they're in combat, basically if you can create distance, you create time. So you create this distance from the attacker or whatever. You have time to make decisions. You're safer. You get out of the range of certain attacks. So it's really the same in self-defense. But I mean, let's say you and me, we're going to meet at the flagpole at 3:00. No one else is going to jump in. There's no weapons. And I have a few years of jiu-jitsu training and you have nothing, there's probably a good chance that jiu-jitsu training is going to come in handy.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, the person who has been training with realistic resistance is likely going to win. Pending something else like a massive size or strength advantage that you just don't have the technique to overcome. I mean, if you have been training jiu-jitsu, or really if you've been training any martial art with realistic resistance, you're probably going to have a much better chance of success than if you didn't. But that said, that chance of success is probably still not great. For myself, even if I have a 70 or 80% chance of fending off a random attacker, those are still not good odds. There's really nothing to be gained in getting into a street fight. So the one thing that you do learn at a high level is you just want to avoid these situations altogether. It is not a good idea to go out there and start trying to pick fights with people.
But I love when people are like, oh, pulling guard in the street won't work if it's against, if it's one-on-one or whatever. It's like, yeah, I think it will work, actually. Like, try to... If
I know people who have done it.
Yeah. If you have like a high-level guard and you know how to implement certain sweeps, you know how to get on top. Like, once you get on top, that person is fucked. And also, if you're a high-level jiu-jitsu or just a practitioner and you have, a few years of experience under your belt, there's something to be said about how you can control and compose yourself during a conflict that just the layman doesn't have. I mean, what's that saying? It's like you are 1,000 times less effective in a fight than you think you are if you're just like untrained. But if you do jujitsu constantly, you're going to be way more aware. Your decision making is going to be way more effective, and you're not gonna usually cardio tap out of an adrenaline dump, right? You're going to be more prepared for that situation because you have that live resistance training. I'm not saying to pull guard in the street. I don't think that's very smart, but I do think that the benefit of training jiu-jitsu is if you do end up on your back in a situation, you have options from there, you know how to get on top, and you know how to take control of the situation.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't know if it's necessarily the wisest idea to pull yourself into a position that could be inferior, but that said, you are going to be as effective as your training. If you train with realistic resistance and you focus your training in certain positions, you'll probably be effective from those positions, even if they're technically not the best. Like, if you're a jiu-jitsu guy and you don't do a lot of stand-up, but you do a lot of guard work, there's a good chance that when it goes to the ground, even though the guard is maybe not the best position, just due to experience, you're probably going to win, or at least be able to defend yourself. So I think that jiu-jitsu is definitely effective as a self-defense martial art. I am always surprised when people argue that it's not, because there's so much evidence to the contrary. So why exactly people continue to believe that it isn't effective, I don't know. Usually when I see people arguing against jiu-jitsu for self-defense, it's along the lines of, it's not so much about, does guard work or does jiu-jitsu work? It's more, does spider guard work, or does like some lapel guard work, or this or that, right? That's usually what they're talking about. And they're kind of targeting these specific aspects of jiu-jitsu that are very sport focused. Now, I
think if someone has a jacket or a hoodie on, I think it will work.
I don't see why it wouldn't. I don't see why it wouldn't. I mean, I guess theoretically, if you go to like spider guard, the person could kick you, but then they're effectively sweeping themselves. So I think, again, you're as good as your training. I would not be surprised if a really good jiu-jitsu person could spider guard sweep a person in a fight. Of course, there is a limitation there. The person's got to be wearing a long sleeve jacket or a shirt, but that's not exactly something that's rare.
No, unless you're fighting guys on the beach.
Well, this is Brazilian jiu-jitsu.
Which happens all the time in Brazil.
Apparently so.
But even things like a basic tripod sweep or like an idiot sweep, like there's nothing that says that couldn't work.
No, absolutely not.
Like the person has 2 legs, so it should be possible. And obviously berimbolos work.
Berimbolos work in every situation. I mean, if there are videos out there of armadillos doing berimbolos, then clearly it's just, it's part of nature. And you can't argue with that. Like, if other animals have independently evolved to do berimbolos, then clearly they work in every situation possible.
It's the most complete martial art out there.
Berimbolos are a martial art now?
I don't know.
So, I mean, this is a tricky one because I do to some extent agree that jiu-jitsu has kind of evolved to the point where it is moving away from its self-defense roots. A lot of the changes that have been made to make it a competitive and standardized sport, they result in strategies that you wouldn't necessarily do in a real fight, right? Like things like inversion, for example. There are scenarios where that would make sense in a real fight, but it probably wouldn't be the place you'd want to put yourself. And similarly, if you take a look at the kind of posture that you adopt when you start a jiu-jitsu match, that kind of squatted down posture is maybe not exactly how you would want to stance yourself if you're in a self-defense scenario. So I do agree that there are things that are causing jiu-jitsu to move away from its self-defense roots. But at the end of the day, I'm not convinced that it makes jiu-jitsu any less effective as a self-defense art.
No, not at all.
For example, I mean, look at judo. It sucks in judo, in my opinion, that they've taken out things like double and single legs. I think that sucks. I think it makes the art less effective. But on the other hand, I don't think many people would argue that judo is a poor self-defense art. Like, judo is an awesome self-defense art.
For sure.
So, yeah, there are some changes that have maybe weakened it in some ways, but I think at the end of the day, the core is still strong. And same with jiu-jitsu. I mean, yeah, the lapel guard stuff and the spider guard stuff may be a bit exotic, but I think there is enough evidence out there that shows that jiu-jitsu still works effectively as a self-defense art.
Yeah. What about judo versus wrestling in a street fight? What do you think?
Oh, man. Generally speaking,
assuming, okay, let's say new judo rules, so no grabbing of the legs versus a freestyle wrestler.
Is the freestyle wrestler allowed to grab the legs?
Oh, yeah.
Well,
they're both allowed to grab the legs, but they both have jackets on.
Oh, interesting. I find it really, really hard to bet against wrestlers simply due to the level of intensity that they tend to train with. It's like we said earlier, you're only as good as the quality of your training. And from my experience, the average wrestler or MMA fighter trains a lot more diligently than the average judoka or jiu-jitsu guy. You have a lot of hobbyists who train judo and jiu-jitsu, and nothing against that. I mean, I'm one of them, and it works even if you're a hobbyist. But that said, I mean, your average wrestler is going to be a lot more athletic than your average judoka, I think.
And in a street fight sense, I mean, a lot of judoka, even at the Olympic level, don't have great newaza. So if it hits the ground, they could be lost. Whereas wrestlers are pretty comfortable on the ground, and if you don't know how to play guard or do anything off your back, you're kind of screwed.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that really defines a quality martial art is that it plans for the worst case scenario. Like, the problem I have with martial arts like Taekwondo is that they really assume that you're going to have this like one shot, one kill thing where, you do a big flying kick and it knocks the other person's head off and that's the end of it. But
take my dough.
Yeah, but what do you do if none of that works? And judo, although it's extremely effective, the rule set has kind of forced it into that situation now where the rule set favors going for big explosive throws and not really protecting yourself. Yeah. So you're trying to get that big ippon, which looks awesome when you look at highlight reels, but these people are used to training in scenarios where if they go to the ground, they can just turtle up and they're going to get stood back up again.
Yeah,
so
it's not good.
Yeah, I think that for any martial art to be effective, you've got to be able to train out of the worst case scenario, which I think is actually one of the reasons why jiu-jitsu is so effective, is because it just assumes you're going to go to the worst case scenario and you have to work your way backwards out of it. Yeah. I think that's why it is so effective. And I think that is the one weakness of judo, right? Is if you don't hit that big judo throw, what are you going to do?
The rules have changed it so much that it's not really looked at as a self-defense art anymore. But even like in BC, we have police judo, which is a very simple. It's not Kodokan judo, but it's a simplified version of judo that the police learn so that they can basically execute throws from standing and, get handcuffs on their opponent or whatever. People actually get ranked under it, but it's clearly not like,
heavily modified.
You're not going to go to the Olympics with that training.
No.
It's just for police officers.
Yeah, and a lot of that stuff is heavily tailored too, because first of all, you don't need to be like a grand master of judo if you're going to be a police officer. You just need to be good enough that you can use the techniques on the fly. But also there's a lot of other variables that you have to control for. Like I know in jiu-jitsu, when police train jiu-jitsu, they've got to be wary of moves like guillotines because they prevent you from blocking access to your sidearm, right? It's great if I grab onto someone and guillotine them, but if I have a gun on my belt, I don't want to necessarily leave it undefended and have my hands tied up somewhere else. So there's a lot of other reasons why these martial arts have to be translated if you're going to bring them into like a law enforcement situation. There's also the law too, right? I mean, you can't be doing something that's going to really, really hurt someone if you throw them on their head.
Yeah, and like certain even jiu-jitsu is modified for self-defense. Like I've always been told that, chokes are a lot more convincing than joint locks. If someone's coming at you and they're trying to hurt you, or maybe they're drunk or high or whatever, and they might not have a low tolerance to pain, then if you like armbar them and pop their arm, they might not stop fighting, right? They might actually bite you if you have an armbar on them because your leg is draped over their face. So something like an armbar might not be the most effective self-defense tool, but like a rear naked choke is pretty effective. A triangle is pretty effective. Kimuras, things like that are pretty damn effective.
Yeah.
So you would, in a self-defense situation, you're probably going to have to modify your style of jiu-jitsu if you get into it, right? Close guard, keep the guy close to you so he can't punch you. Yeah, basically basic MMA jiu-jitsu is kind of what you're looking at.
It's interesting. I used to really worry about this, will I be able to defend myself if someone's actually taking swings at me while I'm playing guard? But I kind of realized after a while that if you're just really diligent about using your frames, you kind of have your defenses up where you need them to be anyway. Like you're not really like leaving your head just sitting there unexposed. I mean, you should be using your hands to try to control the other person's hands in most situations, and that's going to block easy access to a strike. It's not bulletproof, but at the end of the day, once you learn to get better with your frames, that kind of distance and space management and putting up an obstacle between you and your opponent, I think it's a good start towards applying this to self-defense. I do think, though, that there are some things that have changed in jiu-jitsu that make it weaker for self-defense. Like one of them, of course, we've talked about this a lot, but the lack of reaping, for example, like that is a super, super, super effective strategy for controlling someone.
Yeah, redirects them and they can't hit you effectively if you reap them and turn them away.
Yeah, so if you're not training with reaping, then that's a very effective tool in a self-defense scenario that you just won't have at your disposal. Additionally, maybe less controversial things. People always poo-poo on air chokes and on neck cranks and stuff like that. But I mean, that stuff is just as effective as a blood choke. For some reason, we've got it into our heads that cutting off blood flow to someone's brain is like gentle. And these other chokes are like vile and barbaric. But that's just the narrative that we've been told. But in reality, these are all tools that we should have at our disposal. And especially in a self-defense situation, you need to bear in mind that, you're not necessarily going for a clean blood choke. You just need to subdue the other person.
Yeah. I don't listen to those narratives, although when I play...
Oh, I know you don't.
But when I play it through my mind, I also think this, like, let's say I get into a street fight with someone and I get to their back and I have a neck crank going. And it's like, okay, now what? Like,
are you willing to paralyze
Am I going to kill this person? No. He's like tapping or screaming and I'm just going to keep cranking his face as he bites my arm. It's like, it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation,
Forrest Griffin wrote a book, which of course, being Forrest Griffin is mostly just comedy, but he opens
mostly just pictures and drawings.
But he opens it with this great story about this geeky kid that he went to school with, and how this kid was the scariest guy in the whole school because he was willing to take the fight where no one else would go. Like people would, bully him and maybe push him around, but they just wanted to bully him. Whereas this kid would fight to the death. And eventually people would just run away from him because they weren't willing to take the fight to the level that this guy was going to. And that's something that you have to bear in mind for self-defense is you probably don't want to actually really hurt or kill the other person. Yeah. So to some extent, that kind of dictates which techniques you're really going to use in that scenario. Because, yeah, Matt, to your point, I mean, are you really going to rip this guy's head off?
Yeah, like you get the guy in a twister and you're just like, break his back.
Yeah, like, I mean,
and then he sues you and you lose everything.
Yeah, like, so there is a line where these techniques are not really realistic for a self-defense scenario. But that kind of falls into the old, like, traditional martial arts narrative about these techniques are too dangerous to use, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, it is a situation where you can use something like the twister, but yeah, you've got to understand that your opponent may be wanting to take the fight a notch higher than you want to, and that might restrict really how effective that's going to be in a self-defense scenario, because presumably you don't want to actually hurt the person.
Which brings us back to the point that attacking the groin is the best self-defense.
Oh yeah, I mean,
monkey snatches the peach.
Yeah, human beings have known that attacking the groin is the ultimate self-defense strategy, and I mean that's really where the Canadian taint-based grappling system comes from, right?
Yeah. The Island Top Team.
ITTT.
Yeah. And then revisit the groin after.
Yeah, we should actually do a whole episode just on taint-based tactics. I mean, that's another thing where I think people are, they talk about, oh, I could just bite or groin strike or eye gouge you. I think people think those techniques would be more effective than they actually would be in a realistic fight, especially against a seasoned grappler. Like, I think that any technique that talks about, like, deadly techniques or techniques that are so dangerous you can't really practice them at full intensity, the problem with that stuff is, like, even if the technique actually works, which I'm doubtful about, if you can't train a technique at 100% against a resisting opponent, you're not actually good at that technique. Like, you can do a million repetitions, but unless you know how to do it against someone who's resisting, you're not actually good at that technique, and it's most likely not going to work. And the thing to bear in mind, too, is that, yes, you can bite or eye gouge or groin strike, but so can the other person. Like, that is not some magical, mystical martial art that only you know about through training. So I kind of feel like anyone who promises that is the solution to self-defense is really just, they're selling you an ego boost and not anything useful.
Yeah, and that's why, again, just to reconfirm why I think MMA is the best training is because in MMA, you are going to be put in those positions and you are going to get punched in the head and you have to keep fighting. Yeah. So nothing can really prepare you for the reality of fighting for, aside from all the illegal techniques that can happen, like that can. And you can still make decisions under that kind of pressure. That's probably the most realistic.
I agree. MMA is the best self-defense art you're going to get, not just because of the techniques it shows. I mean, of course, the benefit to MMA is you get this massive breadth of effective techniques, but just the intensity and the level of resistance you're going to get. Like, people who train MMA are tough as nails, generally speaking, right? They have a lot of fight in them, and they're used to training against real resistance. I find, and I think probably a lot of listeners out there will relate, that like an MMA blue belt can be a lot harder to roll with than like a very, very technical black belt, just because that level of intensity, if you're not used to it, it's very, very hard to keep up, and it can grind your cardio down really, really quick. So there's something to be said about MMA as a self-defense art. I do think it is probably your best bet. And also the thing about MMA too is, you lose like the gi as a weapon, but sometimes you might not have the gi available as a weapon. So that kind of means that the stuff you do in MMA is going to be applicable in almost any self-defense situation. The thing, though, that I would really want to emphasize is that as you train, the one thing you kind of learn more than anything else is that self-defense, like the more you train, the more you realize there is no magical solution. And I find personally that the more I train, the lower my confidence goes in a self-defense situation. Not because I'm getting worse, but because
you realize how bad it is.
I am much more aware of how hard it is to guarantee that you're going to win a fight. Like, it's just, the odds are never in your favor when you're in a fight. Whereas what really bothers me are like self-defense seminars or programs where you come in for like a 60-minute session and, you kick a dummy in the groin a few times and you come out of there with nothing but confidence. You come out of there feeling like you're a legitimate badass and you could actually do this stuff in a real fight. Whereas I think that training for years, you learn very quickly, for years with real resistance, that you kind of have humility beaten into you, and you realize that like there is no magic bullet to winning a fight. There is no guarantee that you're going to win, and you have that false confidence removed. I actually think that a lot of these self-defense seminars that people go to are more dangerous than they are beneficial, because they teach people knowledge that isn't actually going to work, but they make them more confident about their ability to defend themselves than they actually are. So they're probably more likely now to get into trouble than they would have been if they just did nothing.
Not Systema. That is the best. You ever
So
seen that shit?
so Systema is the weird, like, I think there is a branch of Systema that is legit, but I know the videos you've seen, and they do not look legit at all.
I always wonder, like, these people on these videos that I see where the sensei is like...
They're always like big, obese guys too.
Yeah, and they're just LARPing, and people are like pretending to pass out left and right. I'm like, man, like, people actually do this and pretend that they're getting knocked out, and... like it's almost like a form of brainwashing. It's like cultish behavior.
It actually is. I mean, we've talked in the past about cults and martial arts, and cults and martial arts have a long and intertwined history. Like a lot of traditional martial arts, you could probably classify as cults. This is why I'm very wary of any martial art that demands, discipline and respect to the instructor at all costs, and you can't question the instructor. Like any martial
that's how I do
it. Well, we did talk about this in, I think, episode 13. But any martial art that tries to subjugate you, I worry that eventually you're going to get to a point where you're presented with techniques that don't work and you can't say anything. And then through collective delusion, those techniques take root, and eventually people trick themselves into thinking they're more effective than they are. I mean, just look back at the movies. When we grew up, Matt, I mean, prior to ever watching the UFC, I mean, if I were to ask you what a fight looked like, you would think it would look like Chuck Norris, like throwing flying kicks and stuff. And really, at the end of the day, that is not at all what a fight looks like. Yeah. That stuff is not effective, but that's just part of how the myth propagated due to Hollywood and pop culture.
Yeah, we didn't know that until we saw UFC, I guess. That kind of cleared up a lot of stuff. And now you'll notice like the fight choreography in movies.
It's totally different.
It's like actual, there's actual judo techniques, there's jiu-jitsu techniques. I mean, just take like John Wick movies, which are awesome. And, Keanu Reeves is doing actual techniques in that movie, as opposed to like you mentioned, Chuck Norris. Sorry, but you can't roundhouse kick a room of like 100 dudes.
Well, you can if they all come at you one at a time.
And also if you're Chuck Norris. But I miss the days of when UFC was style versus style.
I miss that too.
When you'd actually see like a wrestler versus a judoka or a karate guy versus a boxer. It's like now MMA has gotten to the point where everyone is so high level and everyone knows all, pretty much everything they need to know to get into the cage at the highest level, that it's all meshed into one art, MMA.
Yeah.
And so now it's like, instead of seeing all these different diverse styles, which for me was way more entertaining, obviously not the safest for the fighters at the time, but definitely more crowd pleasing. And now it's like, because there's such high level skill, you see a lot of fights kind of cancel each other out.
Yeah. So, I mean, modern MMA is very much a laboratory where people take what works and they discard what doesn't. And as a result, all of these martial arts that came together, the bits and pieces that worked from all of them have stayed, and the rest has been discarded. And what you wind up with is this mostly consistent martial art that they all train. But it was way more fun when, like, back in UFC 3. Did you know that the guy who won UFC 3 was a ninja?
Really?
He was Steve Jenham. He was a ninja.
Ninjutsu? Was that his art?
Ninjutsu. He was a ninjutsu black belt. The reason he won was because he got a bye because Hoist Gracie, he got injured in that fight with Kima, so he forfeited. And Steve Jenham, I think, beat up like Keith Hackney or some jobber. Like he just like it was basically a bar fight. Like, and just one guy won, and he just so happened to be a ninja. Now, hey, if you want to ever talk about like people who have deluded themselves into thinking that their martial art works, watch like actual ninja ninjas. It is the saddest thing in the world. Like, you see these movies and these ninjas look like living shadows of death, but then when you actually see two ninjas fighting, it is the most pathetic thing you've ever seen.
Hey, you wear their slippers. So.
I do wear their slippers. But like, I mean, seriously though, you watch a movie and you see like someone throw a shuriken and you're like, man, look at that. That looks amazing. But when you actually see someone do it in practice, it looks so pathetic. It doesn't work at all.
Looks like Beverly Hills Ninja. Which is amazing, by the way.
Yes. So, well, actually not far off in this case. So I think for me, the takeaway here, at least from my standpoint, I feel like jiu-jitsu obviously is effective as a self-defense martial art, but the best self-defense strategy remains preservation and de-escalation. Like the thing to bear in mind about any realistic fight, the odds of you actually gaining anything from a fight are pretty slim. The majority of fights are lose-lose. Now, sometimes you have to defend yourself in the absolute worst case, but in the majority of situations, fighting is something that you want to avoid if you can. And I worry that a lot of the quote-unquote self-defense martial arts are just deluding people into engaging in risky behavior and having more confidence in their ability to defend themselves than they actually have. I think the benefit to jiu-jitsu is it kind of beats that out of you, and you realize pretty quickly into jiu-jitsu, like, I would never want to actually get into a real fight. Like, if I can't even control the spazzy white belt, there's no way that I want to actually have someone taking swings at me or having their buddy there or who knows what.
What about, like, okay, two jiu-jitsu fighters, same level. One guy does only gi, the other guy does only no gi, and they're both wearing clothes, and they get into a street fight.
I think you might have just invented, like, the new UFC. Because all of this style stuff is sorted out. So maybe the new UFC is just all of these different jiu-jitsu and grappling styles against each other.
I'm not going to lie, I would love to see UFC have, like, a gi division, or have, like,
it would be amazing.
Have fights that allow the gi. Like, how much more fun would that be if you could grab the gi? It would totally change the sport, although it's never going to happen, but it'd be super fun, like back in the Pride days when you'd see guys using the gi.
I wouldn't be surprised if they did like a spin-off show or something. I mean, I don't think they would ever put this on their main card, but I wouldn't be surprised if they did some like minor league side show that they ran on their network, and they had like a kind of like a gi division that was basically grappling. I mean,
I don't think UFC is going to do it, but I think an MMA organization could do it, and it would be fun.
Have you ever seen Shock Fights?
No.
Okay, so I think it was held out of like Costa Rica, which of course it was because you could never do this in the US. But basically it was MMA with tasers. Have you ever seen the team MMA where it's like 5-on-5?
Yeah, that's awesome. That's in like Russia or something. I've also seen MMA where two guys are strapped to a table and they have to beat the shit out of each other, like an arm wrestling table, and they're allowed to just beat on each other, but they can't escape. It's awesome.
Isn't that a WWE thing where you're like tied to your opponent and you can't get away?
Maybe, I don't know. But this is a table and it's full on MMA, like kicks, strikes.
You surely can't get a lot of power if you're strapped to a table.
Yeah.
Okay. Write in and tell us about the crazy, weird, deviant versions of MMA you've seen. I always love these like crazy, weird, like tiny things from some country in the middle of nowhere where they've like got some weird exotic version of this stuff where they're like doing MMA with like billy clubs or something.
Okay, but back to my question. I personally think that if you're both wearing like a jacket and you got a guy who does gi and a guy that just does no gi, and they're like the same level, let's say stylistically they're the same too. So like one guy isn't an exceedingly good wrestler. They're both like decent wrestlers. They're both decent on the guard. And then they're both wearing jackets. Okay. Do you think the guy who has the gi experience is going to be able to utilize that jacket in enough of a fashion that it could win them the fight? So, I think they totally could.
So they're both wearing jackets or just the gi guy?
No, they're both wearing jackets.
And they can both grab the jacket?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, the gi guy's got a massive advantage.
I agree.
Mean, like the thing about the gi is... Yeah, in a self-defense situation, you can't always rely on it because, you might get attacked by a naked person. You never know. But at the end of the day, like the thing about gi techniques is they give you incredible leverage. I mean, anyone who's had a collar choke applied to them knows what I'm talking about. The gi gives you so much more leverage than you get without it. So if you have someone who knows how to use the gi, and all other things being equal, that is a massive advantage in that case.
Okay. Make it even more interesting. The gi guy has no concept of leg locks or reaping, and the no gi guy knows how to heal.
Oh, hey. That is actually a tough one, because both parties have a devastating weapon that they're employed that the other team does not know how to defend properly. That would be a coin flip in my mind.
Yeah, I agree. I think that would be a coin flip, because a leg lock is something where you can actually break someone's leg if you're good at, if you have the proper mechanics, and then that could win you the fight.
Okay, if any of you out there have a friend of relatively equivalent skill level, but one of you only does gi and the other one only does leg locking, we need you to get into a street fight
and tape
it and send it to us. We'll give you a shout out or something, or send you some patches or something. But
okay, legally we're not inciting violence, but if you want to,
we are not,
for the sake of the show.
For clarity, we are not encouraging violence. This is purely research. This is you're doing this of your own volition. But if you do happen to do this unrelated, send us the video.
Yeah, we'd love to see it.
Yeah, I actually have no idea who would win. I mean, that's an example of like asymmetric warfare, where both parties have a massive advantage that the other party does not know how to deal with.
Yeah, there's only one way.
Yeah,
we have to have that fight.
It's
the fight the grappling world needs.
It's basically like, what I would love to see is like a Mortal Kombat of all of the grappling styles. Like some big.
that's a great idea.
Like a massive tournament where you get the best from all the world, and you get like the best Sambo guy, and you get the best like MMA guy, and you get the best judo guy, and the best gi and the best no gi guy, and then you put them all together. And then at the end of the day, you have to like fight a sorcerer and
a guy with 8 arms. It's kind of what ADCC was, like ADCC was all these different grappling styles coming together. And now they're pretty much all jiu-jitsu fighters.
Yeah.
Because
the problem, it's the do what works thing, right?
Yeah, it's the do it. And but also really strong wrestlers, but it's obvious that you need to have a high level of jiu-jitsu to be able to win an ADCC title, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it's just the last ADCC we saw proved that. But I think that is a really cool idea. The only problem is I think jiu-jitsu fighters would clean up and it wouldn't be fair.
Yeah, I think that maybe the time has passed for something like that. There's just too much information out there, and even within arts like jiu-jitsu, like I think these people who only train the purest form of the style and have no exposure to anything else, I'm not even sure if these people really exist en masse anymore. Like everyone is cross-training to some extent, right? I mean, even if you're a jiu-jitsu guy and you never do judo, just due to exposure, you've probably learned at least enough about judo to get to your game, which is going to be to like pull guard, right? So I think maybe the days of just ignorant people beating each other up for our amusement have passed, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, if you were listening to this hoping to get some pointers on self-defense, how to be better, I apologize.
Wasted an hour.
you literally this may be the most useless episode of BJJ Mental Models ever, and we did an episode that was literally just all lies. So, but seriously, I mean, I think that this is an interesting discussion, but I think people do get overly hung up on it. I don't think there is such a thing as a good self-defense martial art. I think common sense is the best way to defend yourself on the street or in a combat scenario. Yeah,
and if you feel like you still have to have this debate, shut up. Go train. This is really, it's just for fun.
I get a kick out of this. Once people find out I train jiu-jitsu, especially once they find out I'm a black belt, they always like try to test me or to like poke holes in my knowledge. Like I was walking down the street one day by my office, and one of my coworkers jumped up behind me, and I didn't see him coming, and he like grabbed me from behind and grabbed my neck, and he said, if I had a knife, it doesn't matter that you're a black belt. You would have been dead by now. And I was like, I mean, I guess that's true, you fucking psycho. Like, who thinks about this stuff? People shouldn't be like training a martial art up to black belt level because they want to literally kill other people. Like, that's not a normal thing to think about. I don't think any martial art can prepare you for just total crazy lunatics like that.
White belt logic.
Yeah.
So you mean he came up and surprise attacked you and it was annoying?
Yes,
interesting.
Basically, he annoyed me and then said he could have killed me if he wanted to, and my belt rank would have been meaningless.
No, I say interesting because you're the king of surprise attacks.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's not really surprise attacks. I don't surprise attack. I explicitly tell the person I'm not going to attack them, and then I do. Like that's kind of completely, it's inversion in action, right? You say, we're not doing jiu-jitsu right now, we're going to do something else, and then you just jump on a person like an angry puma.
And just throw a rear naked choke in and just lean back as hard as you can.
Of course.
Totally safe. especially when performed on white belts.
And then, of course, you celebrate afterward. That's very, very important. Gym celebrations are a crucially undertrained technique in how to celebrate when you win on the mat. Anyway, we actually have a question. So this will hopefully be
actually going to be something we can learn here.
There's going to be actual valuable content this time. So the question is, I've been training 4 years now. I teach fundamentals 1 to 2 days a week at my gym. The other instructors teach, quote unquote, the technique 1, 2, 3 approach. And by that, I presume he means we've got 3 techniques today that we're going to do approach that, most gyms, I think, kind of fall into this pattern, and we've maligned that approach in the past. From the beginning of my training, I have always tried to approach training through the concepts you discuss without knowing the exact vocabulary you use. I now have a new vocabulary. Thank you. You're welcome. I have started to use this new vocabulary. Some people are beginning to dig into the concept approach, others have not. Do you have any pointers on how to create a more cohesive conceptual training curriculum? That's a good question. And it's a hard
posture, structure, base.
Basically.
Frames, levers, wedges.
Yeah. I would just tell them to subscribe to and listen to the BJJ Mental Models podcast. There's more than enough content there. And most of it is actually useful, I think.
Yeah. And obviously bjjconcepts.net, which is Rob Bernanke's online academy. It's where I've gotten all my stuff from. I would just say I've thought about this, how, if I was going to design a curriculum, what would be the best things that I could go over. And the forefront things are always posture, structure, base, frames, levers, wedges, 3 layers of guard. Those are the main things that I would say, especially if you're teaching a fundamentals class. You could literally spend months, maybe even years just focusing on those things. If you're teaching fundamentals, those are the fundamental things that you need to conceptually teach. This whole we're going to do this technique, then this technique, then this technique. It doesn't really show the student why or how things are working. It just shows them a sequence. So more important to show the actual concepts behind what you're doing and why it works. You could spend, a lot of time talking about the 3 layers of guard and still have tons of, you're never going to exhaust that topic. That's the bread and butter of jiu-jitsu, right? So yeah, those are the main things that I would say.
Yeah, we've talked about doing a podcast episode on how to build a curriculum, and it is something I would very much like to do, but it is a very complicated concept. There's a lot to unpack there. I would say the first and best thing to do is to look into what people have already done, find something that you like, and use that as a starting point. You don't need to necessarily reinvent the wheel. A lot of approaches, like Matt said, for example, like Rob Bernanke's approach, is a really good systems-based approach to learning. Danaher as well, of course, is famous for this. So you don't need to start from ground zero. You can take these existing frameworks and build on top of them or tailor them to your needs. I do think that the technique 1, 2, 3 approach, I'm not going to say it doesn't work, because there's ample evidence that people over the long term have, learned jiu-jitsu very effectively just by drilling tons and tons of techniques. But I find with that approach, number one, it feels to me like people could be learning faster than they do learn when they use that approach. And number two, some people might get it, but a lot of people may not. There's going to be people who, if you throw a million techniques at them, they're able to just put it together just because they're naturally intuitive at jiu-jitsu. But you're going to leave a lot of other people behind, and some of those people could wind up being some of your best students, right? So I think that a conceptual approach is always something that you want to encourage at the end of the day. Something that I would focus on is just thinking in terms of if there's only 1, 2, 3 things that you could teach, what would to the exclusion of everything else? If you only had 1 to 3 things that you could focus on, what would those be? And I think that'll kind of give you your North Star in terms of what to focus on and how to build on top of that. For me, the thing that I would teach is, number one, I would talk about, in terms of the mechanics of jiu-jitsu, I would talk about alignment. In terms of how to learn and how to get better, I would probably talk about different mindsets and learning methods, some of the stuff that we've talked about earlier. And in terms of strategy, I would probably talk about frugality and how to do more with less and how to be efficient. Because I think that gives you a good framework that you can build everything else on top of. So that's how I would answer that, just in in short. Again, at some point, we'll probably cover this in much more depth than we will here, but I hope that's at least somewhat helpful. Again, I know that a lot of you out there run your own gyms or your own courses, so if anyone has any suggestions as to what's worked for them, please feel free to shoot us a plug. Let us know what you're doing, because we're always interested in hearing new and different approaches to solving this problem.
Yeah, and if you're gonna teach fundamentals, definitely, like Steve said, keep it more simple rather than complicate things. Leave that for the advanced classes. Fundamentals should be like basic movements. I think fundamentals is a great time to use movement drills, whereas advanced classes, a lot of the time you want to talk more about techniques and target sparring and things like that. But the movements are something that will really help beginners sort of find their coordination when they're grappling. And then it's always important to talk about things like posture structure base. But keeping things simple, I think, usually can be a lot more powerful than trying to show too much.
Yeah, I think another thing that you can do that's really going to help your students is to tell them what to expect out of jiu-jitsu. And this is something that I don't really see anybody do, and it's such a huge problem. I mean, when you start a new job, one of the first things that they're supposed to do is train you, right? They tell you like what to expect and how this job is going to work. And whereas when you go to jiu-jitsu, a lot of the time you go to class and it's just, hey, technique of the day is the arm bar. Here's the 10 steps to doing it. Take it or leave it, right? Whereas I think what is helpful is if you actually tell people what to expect. We say, here's the armbar, but you also tell them the kinds of things that we tell you in this podcast, which is you might know the steps, but it's probably not going to work in practice. So don't beat yourself up left and right and think that you suck just because you can't do this thing on day one. Yep. Explain why it doesn't work. Talk about predictable responses and how it's not just a matter of memorizing the steps, but it's about having a game plan and knowing how you can pivot off of what your opponent might do. That kind of stuff. Giving them an anchor for what to expect, so that they don't keep hitting wall after wall after wall, I think is a really, really valuable strategy. So, treat your students like you wish you had been treated back when you were new. What are the things that you know now, not even about the move, but about jiu-jitsu itself, that you wish someone had explained to you so that you didn't feel stupid. Yeah. Because I think we all feel stupid a lot of the time. And it would be nice if people kind of gave you a heads up as to where you're going to get stuck.
And I think a really important concept would be, like, you could spend a lot of time talking about position versus alignment. Like, instead of looking for your arm bar that you've drilled 100 times, look for signs that you have the opportunity to misalign your opponent. You know what I mean? Like, if you can teach students how to misalign your opponent and create vulnerability, then the armbar is going to be way more present than if you just look for the armbar, right? So yeah, trying to teach your students how to create vulnerability by breaking alignment is a super important concept. And also, to your point, Steve, talking about like things you can expect in jiu-jitsu, I think one thing that, even though I'm a gym owner and I don't tell this to everyone that comes in the door, it's like your body is going to go through some changes in the first year or two. Where
jiu-jitsu puberty.
Exactly. Like you're going to have these, you're going to tweak your back. You're going to have these constant pains. You're going to get scuffs and scrapes. Yeah. And, you're going to get mat burns and all these things that you never had before. It's going to hurt when you go shower, but like, it's kind of part of it, right? And then eventually your body toughens up, your feet toughen up, and you kind of realize how to not do stupid shit. And then you stay out of, like I used to actually wear knee pads when I grappled because I would always smash my knees on the ground. And then I realized, oh yeah, it's because I'm smashing my knees on the ground. I should probably not do that. I should have my toes in base most of the time and not smash my knees. And, I grew out of that phase. So it's like your body will adjust throughout your grappling journey. And sometimes it takes a few months, sometimes it takes a few years. And being in pain, unfortunately, our life as grapplers is, we're kind of destined to always being sore from training. And it's just kind of part of it, right? So, if I have somebody that's about to start a jiu-jitsu journey and they're fully dedicated, I want to do it. It's like, okay, but just realize that like, it's a wonderful journey, but you're always going to be sore. Your body's always going to want rest and you're going to be tired. But, the benefits are, I think they outweigh them greatly. So.
Yeah, I agree. And just one more thought on that note, I would also suggest that when you have new students and you I would tell them first and foremost that there really is no such thing as a plateau. When you have been training for a month, if you get stuck for a while, it can feel like a lifetime. But when you've been training for like 12 years, you realize that like the kind of time frames that people talk about when they say, "Oh, I've hit a plateau." It's like, so okay, if you feel like you've had a rough like 3 weeks, in the grand scheme of things, that's not that big a deal. It doesn't mean that you suck at jiu-jitsu, right? I find personally that learning comes in fits and starts. Like I'll go for a month or two without feeling like I'm really getting noticeably better. And then over like a 1 week period, I'll feel like it's just like I get explosively better. And then it plateaus off again. Like learning and growth do not always happen on like a straight linear line up. And I think sometimes people expect that and then they get really hard on themselves when they feel like they're not getting better, especially if they see people around them who they feel like are getting better. Learning is not a straight line. And a big part of staying with jiu-jitsu and getting better at over the long term, or really getting better at anything over the long term, is having the discipline to stick with it even when it feels like you're not getting better. Because one day you are going to break through that plateau. And I don't even know if there's really a formula for how to do it. It's just a matter of being disciplined enough and sticking through it even though you're having a bad time. I find that like the science of dealing with plateaus is something that people don't talk enough about in jiu-jitsu. And it's a real, especially for casual people, they tend to really beat themselves up a lot about this stuff. And that's something that I would definitely put in play if I were building a new curriculum, which is how to cultivate a mindset that will help you succeed over the long term. Not just learning the techniques, but training your brain to be more effective at the process of learning.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Anything else, Matt?
Get your patches and t-shirts at the BJJ Mental Models.
Oh, yeah. Store. You guys, we've got all of the analytics on this. I know there's a lot of people who listen to this. So I know who you are. Well, okay, I don't actually know who you are, but you should still go out and buy those patches. I know that there's a lot more of you who could be buying those patches. But in all seriousness, if you want to buy our merch, we've got t-shirts and we've got patches. You can get that at bjjmentalmodels.com/store. If you want to sign up to our mailing list, bjjmentalmodels.com/join. You'll get all the latest and greatest news and sometimes a lot more detail than we go into on the podcast. You can check us out on Facebook and on Instagram, which is where you can interact with us and where we post most of our timely updates. And of course, we've got our website, bjjmentalmodels.com. If you are a new listener and you have no idea what we're talking about, it's a great place to start because we have a glossary and an explanation of all of these terms that we use. Matt, anything else we should plug?
Not plug, but yeah, maybe we should talk about sponsors. I don't know.
Sponsor us.
We're looking for sponsors. You guys interested in sponsoring us?
We would like.
It's the worst plug ever.
We are not good salespeople, but we would like sponsors.
Hey guys, do you like the show? Do you want to support what you like? Well, help me and Steve out with the podcast. We're currently looking for sponsors and would love to keep giving you awesome content.
You're really good at like the one-off, like just right out of my ass.
Yeah, that was right out of my ass.
That was really, really good. But I'm not going to edit out any of the stuff around it. I think it adds character.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, we would definitely love to have your support. So yeah, please, if you're interested in that, and it doesn't even need to be a business or anything. If you're just interested in promoting your own brand, just give us a shout out and we can make it happen.
All right, guys. Hope you enjoyed the episode of Bullshittery.
I think it was good. I think it was fun. I hope you guys enjoyed it.
God.
Take care.
Gracie sucked.
God.